to say these times are challenging for our organizations and for the people and communities we serve, as well as for each of us as leaders and human beings, is really such an understatement. As a member of the social sector and as such INP's immediate and extended family, we're committed to supporting you however we can and to ensure that we open up opportunities broadly as possible for us to learn and connect and explore ideas together as we navigate this path forward. So please keep sending us your ideas if you're not yet connected and are just joining us for the first time and learning about our community. Know you can reach out to us directly. Lines are open with any ideas or needs you might have for learning and connection as we move along here together. So I just want to open up that invitation. We're so grateful and honored to have Angela Blanchard here today with us. She didn't hesitate for a minute to allow us to open this session up far beyond the walls of the classroom. And I just want to thank her and thank you, Angela, for that. I'm going to hand things off to my colleague and INP's faculty member, Bill Allen, who's going to share more with you about Angela and her leadership in this space. So thank you again for joining us. Know we're here in this with you and really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you very much, Yolanda. Welcome, everybody. Before I begin and introduce Angela, I would like to set a few ground rules. I guess this is pretty standard for people using Zoom now to kind of get our bearings as to how we're going to operate. So first, we'll put everyone on mute, mainly to avoid any extraneous sounds that might arise. But when you speak, you can unmute yourself and we will hear you. We will be using chat box a lot. One, as a repository for questions. Two, if you've got any technology issues, post them on chat. And three, we have two readings that you can access through a link that we posted in chat just a few minutes ago. So I'd recommend that you look at that as well. My colleague and INP colleague, Mariela, is monitoring the chat box on all those aspects. So she'll be alerting us throughout this discussion for your questions and postings or anything that we should know about. So let me begin my remarks and then we'll put Angela right on. You are online, but you are also in Rhode Island in an expanded version of one of our INP core sessions. Shahir Mustafa and I as faculty and our senior fellows, Ana Cana Morales, Paula Fernandez, and Mary Harrison, and all 21 of our Rhode Island participants extend to you all a very warm welcome. And I notice we've got at least 63 online now, so this is really great and impressive. During our INP session last week, we had a robust discussion which outlined the dramatic cultural changes our organizations have experienced over the past 3 weeks. It was clear that the coronavirus was challenging us all as we've never been challenged before, to address urgent, immediate needs, realign resources, and make some very difficult decisions. Members of our INP cohort in Rhode Island, despite significant uncertainty, describe quick, decisive, and strategic actions they are taking. Today's session is designed to help our class and all of you as you continue to lead, plan, and respond in this period of crisis and uncertainty. So let me introduce you to my friend, colleague, and mentor, Angela Blanchard. It's a supreme pleasure to do this. I have known Angela for almost 3 years when she joined the faculty at the Washington Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University, where I teach. Angela had just retired after many years as president and CEO of Baker Ripley in Houston, Texas. Baker Ripley is the largest community development organization in Texas and among the top nonprofits in the nation. It serves and engages individuals in over 50 counties with an annual budget of over $300 billion. In many conversations Angela and I have shared, we have celebrated our experiences in the nonprofit sector. In this process, she has inspired me and refreshed my spirit, my mind, and my soul. Angela has a special combination of experience, temperament, and skills. She is a storyteller, an accountant, a community organizer, a listener, a domestic and global leader in disasters, a consultant, a relationship builder, a thinker, a doer, a teacher, and a warm and enthusiastic humanitarian with a tough, no-nonsense Texas attitude and a passion for justice. She is as comfortable sitting across a conference table at the White House with President Obama as she is listening and comforting those who have experienced multiple trauma, displacement, and crisis. With creative use of appreciative inquiry, Angela and Baker Ripley have engaged residents to rebuild, revitalize, and reconceptualize neighborhoods and community centers, many which had been failing and disconnected to the dramatic shifts happening in Houston. Several of my colleagues and I from Brown had the experience in 2018 to experience this transformation firsthand on a trip we took to Houston at Angela's invitation. Disasters of all kinds have become part of the new normal in Houston. Hurricanes, tropical deluge, floods, the Enron-induced economic collapse, chemical explosions and fires, and now a pandemic. This includes Hurricane Katrina, which required the relocation, as you recall, of almost 250,000 people from New Orleans to Houston. There has been, on average, a federally declared disaster in Houston and Harris County every year for the past 5 years. Angela and Baker Ripley have been at the forefront of every one of these disasters and have developed a keen sense of what works and how to respond. In August 2017, within 12 hours of receiving a desperate call from the Harris County executive, Angela and Baker Ripley had fully operationalized one of the 2 major shelters opened during the Harvey floods. Angela has inspired me as she has inspired Baker Ripley that in every setback, every disaster, every crisis, there are opportunities for innovation, new ways to work across sectors, cultures, and interest groups, new models of organization and practice, new ways to use teams, and new ways to sustain important programs. The type of inspiration and imagination we all desperately need at times like this. So with that, I'm very pleased and happy to introduce my friend, Angela Blanchard.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Bill. That was extremely generous. That was an extremely generous and gracious introduction. Bill knows also all my faults. He didn't share any of them. So it's quite lovely of him. So it's so different for me to be not not looking at all of you and your faces. To see only a few of the people I'm speaking with is such a significant shift, because largely my joy at this stage of my life comes from being in the room with people with a similar, with a passion similar to mine for community change, and for those I consider to be, warriors for the human spirit, those of us who really do whatever it takes in good times and hard times to uplift people, to help people realize their potential, to work to eliminate unnecessary suffering. So today I want to tell you what I'm going to be telling you really is a series of short stories about my work, about how I came to be the disaster lady. And I just like to make a quick request. If the person currently sharing their screen would stop sharing their screen, then I'll pull up my, there we go. And oh, there's so many more of you. Hi, all of you. Wave back at me. I'm like, thank you. Yeah. So great. Okay. So, so I'm going to pull up the slide presentation, and then tell me that, and you've disappeared, so this won't do. So is it possible that you could make the adjustment so I can still see the people that are in the conference?
Angela, this is Nate. I think you'll only be able to see about 3 or 4 people on the side of your screen when you have the PowerPoint up.
Yes, I'm not seeing anyone though, Nate, and I understand. Yeah, I understand the limitation, but I just to see a few people will be useful. If it can't be done, it's all right.
You might try the speaker view option in the top right of your screen. I think that should shift either that or the grid view will shift the view that you have in front of you of.
Yeah, of course it was working previously. All right, let's try again. Speaker view.
Angela, maybe if you share your screen also, Nate could help talk you through it.
There we go.
I think we've got it.
Coming up. Yep.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And my apologies for that little slowdown here. So several years ago now, coming up on 15 years actually, when Katrina occurred, I began to examine what happens when things fall apart. And as I began working with the people who had come from New Orleans, we began building a shared understanding of what happens right after and then in the long tail of recovery and rebuilding. So in that spirit, I wrote a few things, and this is the part where I'd like to give credit to the people who taught me what I'm sharing with you today. They are the leaders that were on the ground, in the arenas, in the places in the world where the unthinkable had happened, where suffering too terrible to name and losses too great to be borne at times had occurred. And these were the people that devoted to community, deeply caring about their cities, went to work to restart their lives. So the wisdom comes from them. And I've been very much influenced by people that I've taught with, Bruce Katz and Meg Wheatley, whom some of you know, and then also had a great experience working with 2 people in Rhode Island, Jen and Tony Silbert, who were our partners as we rolled out an appreciative inquiry approach through the agency. So much of what I'm sharing is sort of wisdom extracted from exchanges with leaders in the arena. So I typically speak by talking about the upheaval in the world. And often I'm invited to speak right after or a year later, and I'm talking about disasters and so forth, hurricanes and floods and war and so forth. And this photograph is a powerful photograph that's on the East Side Gallery in Berlin on a wall now devoted to art. But it's a depiction of what we see around the world, which is an increasing frequency of disaster and upheaval. The collection of stories, and I won't get to share them all with you today because it's important to me to hear from you and what you're dealing with. They come from all of these places and many more cities where I've been invited to work with communities and leaders and nonprofits. And as I say, whether war, whether loss of health or wealth threaten or destroy what we love, that's what we call disaster. When the things we've built and created for ourselves and one another are threatened or wiped away. One other aspect of disaster, however, is it's a disruptive event. It provokes revelation. And I am not inclined to put a Pollyanna spin on the suffering that attends disruption and disaster. But I am also inclined to invite leaders to step up to the learning that can occur. Because in this moment of this COVID-19 virus, the spread of it and the attendant economic disruption that's coming with it, we get to see the full nature of what has been brought to an end, what is threatened, how it, when things stop working, it reveals also how they were working. And I believe that one of the most dangerous concepts in the disaster world is the concept of recovery. And I'll say a little bit about what I mean by that. The fierce and desperate desire that comes in the months after the unthinkable has happened, the fierce and desperate desire to return to what was is one of the biggest and most difficult obstacles, because the true nature of a disaster is that it ends things. Things we value come to an end, and a return to what was is really not possible. So it's this illumination, this moment of illumination, the opportunity to really see what we were upholding and resourcing and protecting. And instead of a desperate, frantic clawing back to what was as quickly as possible, it's a moment where if we're brave enough, we can decide what to bring forward and what to abandon. And I've been asked, why do you want to spend all of your time on the moments and the circumstances and situations and stories where there's the greatest amount of human suffering and struggle? And it's honestly because it only took me a few years to realize that what I was seeing after disasters was really into the heart and soul of what it means to be human. And I saw again and again the clarity that deeply caring leaders possess when the unthinkable has happened, the focus that we can bring, and our immediate default, despite what the headlines say, reality is on the ground, not in the headlines. Our immediate default to community connection and to looking at how we can help one another. So I began to think of those of us who've been washed up on the unfamiliar shore, had everything that we were accustomed to threatened or destroyed, as the shipwrecked, people that in a deep moment, we saw our way of life disappearing and were compelled to go on and face a different future. Now, many of us don't want to look into that abyss. If we're not one of the people, if we've one of the few and lucky ones who've lived most of our lives with stability and security and safety, and our lives have been a steady progression, a continuity, a thread, a dependable thread of continuity, then we may feel some sympathy for others, but we're a little afraid to look too closely at what happens when everything falls apart, because we've been able to say, well, thank God that's not me, and ignore a reality that we're all vulnerable creatures and we're sharing a common journey. And the facts of that journey are that loss is inevitable, upheaval is natural, things come to an end. And I think that many of us together today have probably enjoyed a great deal of safety, security, predictability, and routine. These are things that we value so much that we often ask other people in the world to pay a price for so that we can have them. And we've also paid a very high price to have some of the things that we get accustomed and some of the things we depend upon. But ultimately, we're all vulnerable creatures here as a part of a whole on a planet from which, you know, there really is currently no escape. So I like to embrace that, because it's better if especially in the world we're in now, if we anticipate upheaval, if we imagine that we will face at some point in our lives something acutely painful and perhaps unthinkable. The moment we're in right now, the experience we're having right now was on no one's calendar for this year. When I look back at my work journal, and if you look back at yours, probably about 25 days ago, you were thinking about some things that are of no concern to you today and appear now to be completely irrelevant. So we move quickly, and I want to make a comment about nonprofit leaders. Because we are so accustomed to making difficult choices, because we live always, if we're paying attention, between the desired future and the present pain, we fare better and we perform better as leaders when the unthinkable happens than leaders in many other sectors, because we're not protecting our political flank as elected officials often are or must. We're not looking at our bottom line, because let's face it, our bottom lines never work. The financial ones, that is. So we're instead often focused always on the trade-offs that we are forced to make, the efforts that we make to wrest good outcomes and good services and really good results from often broken systems. So I've seen in the last 3 weeks, I've seen so many nonprofit leaders step up and embrace that we're in a moment where, again, the unthinkable has happened, and now we are going to bravely face the choices we have to make. And I came across this quote. I think it must be wonderful to be named brilliant. One should expect this individual to be confident with a name like that, but I feel given his wisdom, and he's entitled to it. But outbreaks are inevitable, epidemics are optional. So across the world now, there have been a series of choices that have created the current pandemic situation in which we find ourselves. But those were choices. Outbreaks of viruses are inevitable, but the choices we've made have made a pandemic our reality. So what are you to do and think? So I'm telling you today some perspectives and stories from people that have performed well in the middle of chaos. This is not a message of despair. No one's coming does not mean that you've been abandoned and there's absolutely no one that cares about your circumstances or where you are. But for many leaders, and certainly the older we are, the more likely this is to be true, we grew up in a world in which we thought if something really catastrophic occurred, that along with that event would be a response from someone bigger, better, stronger, faster. There would be an institution. There were many institutions we believed in and we thought they had the capacity to show up and help us out. That when it was all too much for us, that a larger institution possessed both the knowledge and resources that would make what we were struggling with more bearable. And what I have observed in all of these situations, whether the desert in Jordan, in a refugee camp for Syrians, in Germany as they were welcoming displaced people, in Australia after fires, over and over again, what I have observed is those communities, those organizations, and those families that fare the best are those that don't wait. So if they've circulated my 13, wisdom from the storm, the first is no one's coming. Work, don't wait. The reason is because you're quick, not recklessly quick, but your thoughtful speed, your determination to go into action and start to embrace what's happened and do what you can really matters over the long haul. And there are some times when it's absolutely necessary. In Houston in August of 2017, Harvey had dumped 51 inches of rain on Houston, and it's a really unthinkable amount of water, and it had drowned our city. Unfortunately, not that many of us, due to some extraordinary efforts on the part of civilians and first responders, but our shelters were going underwater. Places that had been safe had become unsafe. And we were charged to stand up a shelter in a matter of hours. Now, I mentioned this, and Bill has shared that with you also, but this story is important because had we decided that it was really not our job, and technically it was not our job, we would have waited, and it would have been an even worse and more tragic outcome for many members of our community. But we knew that it needed to be done, so we did it. So it's work, don't wait, because the people that you might, and the institutions you might expect to be able to solve this may not. And we've seen that through the course, and this is 3 weeks of coming to terms with the virus, and all of us becoming amateur epidemiologists, being able to talk about things like flattening the curve and disease spread and hospital capacity. We've stepped up to try to educate ourselves, but we've also seen that at different levels of leadership, there's not been the messages that we need and not been the help that we hope for. And it's communities themselves organizing to support those in the arena that have actually, those are the stories that have inspired me, and I'm guessing that inspired you. You can't build on broken. And what does this mean? This is really my, it's the Texans' way of saying, build on strengths. But the fact is, leaders who actually have a good handle on the strengths and skills of the people that they're working with regularly, leaders who have a clear idea of what institutions around them, your fellow leaders and their institutions, what are they capable of? Where do they shine? What are they like at their best? Then those are the relationships and the understandings that you have that allow you to perform well when the unexpected happens. It's not about having a plan as much as it is having a grasp of the strengths and skills of the people around you, knowing what they're like when they're at their best, and having a set of trusting relationships so that you can act in concert with one another. And, in Houston and Harris County, our governor completely punted on the notion that he had a responsibility to make any kind of statewide declaration. He, I think, irresponsibly announced that there were 200 counties in Texas that had no cases, but we had done no testing. So we merely had 200 counties in which we had no idea who was infected. And he sent the decision back to the counties, to the mayors, and compelled them to shoulder the responsibility for making appropriate declarations, even though it's clear now, and I think you would all agree, that the virus, just like water, does not obey a county line. So we're seeing that some leaders are willing to step up and embrace the responsibility. You know, the virus chose us. We live in these times. We must own it. And part of owning it is knowing what those strengths are. So this set of trusting relationships within this region, a 13-county region in Southeast Texas, allowed us to begin to work together and work through the ways in which we saw the situation differently, and then come to a declaration that really worked for our region. This is a powerful statement. There's enough to go around, particularly when we're looking at the fact that there aren't enough ventilators and there aren't enough masks. But this is something that we often would say at Baker Ripley, you know, earn, learn, belong. It's everyone's desire. These are hungers that we all possess. And the idea that it's possible for everyone to have these, that we don't have a shortage problem, we have a distribution problem. We don't lack the resources for ventilators and masks. We've lacked the political will and the determination to provide them and deliver them to places where they're needed. We didn't prepare for this. So now we have the opportunity within every community to find whatever capacity there is to try to support the people in the arena. And I saw this so clearly in Germany as they welcomed people who had left all their belongings behind or were forced to. And within just a matter of days, everything that was needed by those incoming individuals was provided through a set of systems that were created to harness the capacity that existed, the unused capacity in Germany. This is the same way we can think about the scenario we're in now. It is possible for all of us doing what we can with what we have to create the supplies and support that are needed by the people in the arena. This was what it looked like in the shelter during Harvey. And this, again, in a matter of hours, we created this. And the volunteers, the people willing to volunteer. And what is so precious to me about this photograph is that the only unwieldy part of setting up the shelter was we ran out of room for volunteers. We each day had hundreds more volunteers than were needed. That many people showed up to help. Right now, that capacity exists in this country. The desperate desire on the part of everyone watching the news every day to be a part of a solution. And part of what you as a nonprofit leader have the capacity to do is to tap into that. And then the real work you have is to connect that desire to help with a constructive action in your community. So for example, there are lots of congregate meal sites in our region that invite seniors every day into connection with one another for a meal, for a health check, for exercise, and all of those have had to be closed. So it's been the work of nonprofit leaders to take those who really want to help someone, connect them with a senior who's now even more isolated than before the program. They had access to the program, home alone, unable to go out, unable to see friends. And so solving for that was a matter of really getting the connection between those people that really wanted to help and have them plug into the people who really needed a connection, needed someone who could actually get groceries for them, and needed someone to check in on them every day. But the important part of the leadership mindset is what is the capacity in this community that can be tapped into, the generosity that always exists, and how do we match it in this scenario to people who are in need of support and help. This is another shot of our volunteer lines that every day. It was very difficult to turn away people that wanted to help. I'm sorry, you're currently outnumbering the shelter guests. So I do want to say this is a tough thing. And I always, every time I am putting a slide presentation together, I think, should I include this one? Because it's a tough one. We're going to need it. So it's in here today because we didn't create this virus. No matter what we did or didn't do when we learned about it and learned what we needed to do, however perfectly or imperfectly, we embraced the steps we needed to take. We are part of a people experiencing this, and we will be face to face with a grief-stricken, broken-hearted person at some point, because we've all, and some of us have already faced that. Some people have already experienced losses associated, not just the loss of not being able to learn together in a room, but the loss of someone they love, the loss of a dream, the loss of their livelihood. So these losses are going to be deep and profound. Part of a nonprofit leader's job is to hold ourselves together in that space, be willing to say, I'm so deeply sorry for what's happened to you, your community, what's happened to your business, what's happened to your school, what's happened to your family. And this power behind I'm sorry is it opens the way to a different kind of connection and a different way of looking at what we've suffered. Yeah, you know, this is an important teaching, because in this country, it's often our inability, the desire on the part of leaders to say, oh no, I'm just going to be your leader today, and I'm only going to own what starts today going forward. I'm not going to acknowledge what's come before, or the circumstances, or the pain, or the suffering, or the blood and the soil that I'm standing on. And the power of I'm sorry, when you are willing to fully embrace the pain and suffering in the moment, all of it, own it, and say, I'm deeply sorry for what's happened to your family, your community, your livelihood, your loved ones. So this is something that when in the rush and the struggle and the challenges that we face, we don't want to forget that it matters a great deal that we tell people, we express our deep regrets. I want to talk, you know, you saw the places I've been, lessons I've learned in each. Puerto Rico made a deep impression on me, because I was watching the news. We were coming out of Harvey, and we were watching what was happening in Puerto Rico and in Florida. We were feeling this storm solidarity, you know, with the people whose lives were in the same kind of upheaval which we found ourselves. And I kept hearing, oh, you know, we can't really help them because these people are in remote areas and it's so difficult to reach them. And so when I was invited to Puerto Rico, excuse me, I was very anxious to see, you know, what did these remote areas look like? I was trying to envision how far away could something be that it was so impossible we couldn't get food and water to people. So I learned something in Puerto Rico and was reminded again of the same thing that I had experienced being in New Orleans 3 weeks after Katrina. And it was just shocking sense of betrayal. It's what happens when those that we expect to come, those we expect to care, don't. Or what happens when we see the utter disconnect between the message about us and the experience in our own community. This deep sense of betrayal engenders a great deal of pain and can set off a whole chain of despairing emotions and feelings and frustrations and fury. So I mention it because as leaders, we must manage the message about betrayal. I've worked with so many people this week, and I've had to say, you must stop watching the press conference. You know, you can't afford that sort of toxic drip on a daily basis of lies and manipulation and bullying. And we can't afford that. So as a leader, you're going to deal with face-to-face with people infected, and you can't afford to poison yourself with the messages that come from people who are not paying attention to suffering, who do not express are incapable of understanding how people are experiencing this disaster. So the betrayal that comes the leader manages the message about that, it has to have meaning. And the meaning that we give to the betrayal, which is to say, yes, the people we counted on, what we expected to happen did not. And the pivot to community and the triumph of community that went on. This is not ideal. I don't speak to this to say, well, we just excuse everybody that doesn't do their job. But as a leader, you must manage the moment, that moment when we pivot from the fury and the anger and the despair of betrayal. So when I traveled to this one area of Puerto Rico, and many of you have seen this photograph, and they had painted on the street a message for help, asking for food and water. And really, I was shocked because it took less time to get to it than it takes to get across Houston at rush hour. And I felt that third and fourth hand betrayals, like how could we have not come sooner when it was not that hard to get here? So I think we're going to have those experiences throughout this event in which we think the actions that were taken or not taken, we think this is unthinkable that we didn't do better at this. And we have to manage the pivot from that to the constructive action and response that has to follow. So like, I have a twisted sense, I won't say it's twisted, it's a Cajun sense of humor. And if you don't know about Cajuns, I'll let you in on a secret. We don't trust any of this stuff. We don't trust fancy stuff. We don't trust uniforms. We don't trust officialdom. We link policies or kind of suggestions. And we're not sure who came up with them, but we figure they probably weren't written for us, not in any good way and not in any bad way. So that's a secret like belief system that we carry. We pretend to go along with things, but deep inside we think we made all this up. It's bound to be a hot mess. So my humor comes from that place where we're human. We should be expecting to be a big hot mess. So after I go down to Galveston. It was truly a hot mess. This was some weeks after Ike and it had been cleaned up a little bit, but I ran across this sign that was tacked up on this honky-tonk bar, and Hard Times and Misery Saloon. It had been renamed in honor of the circumstances on Galveston Island. And I thought about all the people I know, been through hardship, who wander into the Hard Times and Misery Saloon, climb up on the bar stool, and spend the rest of their lives talking about how the world mistreated them. And that is an option. I do not recommend it. You'll look old after a while, and you won't have many friends because people don't want to hear it. But it is an option. And so I tell people, this disaster's chosen you. You're in this now. And unfortunately and completely unfairly, the fact that you may have already gone through 3 hurricanes and cancer and a plant explosion does not mean you'll be spared from this one. This is the journey we're on. But I don't advise going into the Hard Times and Misery Saloon or spending too much time there. Every now and then I like to have a good wine. I don't call my mom, she's not that type. But I have a couple of friends that will listen to me for a little while, talk about how painful things are. But we really must embrace the challenges in front of us for the largest part, accept that this is where we are, and then we start to be able to create a future out of our imaginations. What could this look like as we come out of it? What will we be working with? Who will we be working with? What would we like to see on the other side? So acceptance is a much more powerful posture, both spiritually, emotionally, and professionally, to take than a resistance or a rejection of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So now this little message from millennials, because I like hear people talk all the time about what's wrong with, I've seen listicles about what's wrong with millennials, and I guess I'm missing out on all of that because whenever I'm envisioning a team to get anything done, I want a healthy supply of millennials, because and this strength, this particular message here is something I feel is a real strength of that cohort. And if you're one of them, I appreciate you for this. You know, people like Bill and I came of an age when we thought we were supposed to transform systems and redevelop whole institutions, and we learned a lot of incredibly, excruciatingly awful change strategies of the 1980s. We undertook to bring about what was needed through the shifting in systems and institutions. And I've observed this incredibly healthy attitude on the part of millennials toward institutions. It's almost as if I witness you just look at them as somehow as part of the landscape, but that you have to deal with, but not necessarily anything that you need to overly concern yourself with. You immediately go to work to craft solutions in their arena. And the improvisational aspect of it does not mean cobbled together, and it does not mean ineffective, and it does not mean temporary. For example, Crowdsourced Rescue was founded in Houston in the middle of the storm of Harvey. Crowdsourced Rescue was founded by two men who, during the night, realized that as people posted their desperate pleas for rescue on Twitter and Facebook, that civilians in boats would go to those locations, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, but maybe miss another person who needed rescue, because there was simply no way to match the person needing the rescue with the person capable of doing it. And because of that, you know, we were being inefficient with extremely scarce resources. So he decided they would create a platform that would issue a unique code for every person calling for help. And then every person that could make a rescue would pick up a code and go make the rescue and retire the code. Immediately then we knew who had been rescued, who had not. We knew where to send the next boat. We knew how to use. We resulted in a real-time perfect match of need to resource in the middle of the storm. So now, and this is the beauty of this story, is that Matthew and his team has stood up, activated Crowdsourced Rescue again for this disaster, because again, we find that there are people who need help, and we need to know specifically what can people provide and who needs what and how can we get it to them. So they're doing a lot to help us match the needs of elderly with people who can safely make deliveries for food and other critical supplies. So these are the kinds of solutions. Improvisation is if you think of an actor on the stage, they're on a stage looking around, they understand their teammates, their fellow actors, they know what they're capable of, and they're embracing the moment, and they work with what's there. And so it's the ability to put together the elements of what's there to make them work better, and to do what you can with what you have where you are. I always like to make sure I'm getting appropriate attribution. Somebody told me Roosevelt said something along those lines. I add it right now because I think the matter of disasters provoke, one hopes, urgency. But the man who gave me this quote was in Detroit. And I was in Detroit, I believe with Meg at the time. We were visiting places and neighborhoods that had been wiped out by the financial crisis and the catastrophic decline of manufacturing in Detroit. And, you know, this was a man who had started this incredible art project in a vacant lot with 2 abandoned houses. And he inspired me because some people saw a vacant lot, abandoned houses, really all the elements. It would have been the perfect urban decay and despair photo, the before, which he transformed into something that was fantastic to visit and see. And then this is a New Orleans musician, and I love New Orleans, and New Orleans is very hard hit right now. Unfortunately, I think people in Louisiana took their cue, and February, when they were told it's not a problem, don't worry about it, Mardi Gras went forward as usual. and which is a grand old time. Mardi Gras is for me, a kind of sacred celebration, and I do love it. And this year, the Mardi Gras and all of the people who were gathered in Mardi Gras really assisted the spread of the virus. But in New Orleans, musicians go out every day on the street. And this is the mindset of a leader that performs well in disaster. You know, in regular times, we might wait for the grant or wait for the policy change or we might imagine some enabling factor to occur before we begin. But musicians go out, they place their case on the ground, they pick up their instrument, and they start to play. And they play before there's an audience, and they play before there's money in the bucket, and they play before there's anyone there to hear them. And I believe very, very much, Anna Kofi is a nonprofit leader I have great regard for here in Houston. And early on, as she was making some really difficult decisions about quarantine and all the rest for her residential facility, she said, my philosophy is I do the right thing for the people I'm meant to serve, and I settle up later. And I found that throughout every disaster I've worked in, I have never regretted taking the chance that on anything, if it was directly tied to the well-being of the people I was meant to serve. I settled up later, meaning I made the budget work and I made the policies bend fit what we had done. It's do the right thing, not the rule thing. So yeah, I've spoken a little already about there's enough to go around, so let me go back. This was the Germany story that I mentioned, and I love the Germany story because not only did they collect everything that was needed, they created a beautiful system for its distribution, and when it had been fully distributed into all the shelters and places in Germany that needed, they began sending it back to countries like Lebanon and Jordan, where Syrians were also in shelters and needed supplies as well. This is a tough one, particularly now, and in our region, we tend to do pretty well with this, but it's been hard this time. It works best in disasters if you can get alignment between the corporate and private interests, the public officials, and philanthropic nonprofit agendas. If there's any table in your community around which those people obviously now can be figuratively gathered to be in agreement about what we're doing and why we're doing it and be unified in messages, that's desirable. And it means for us in the nonprofit sector that we cannot limit ourselves to conversations only with like-minded nonprofit leaders or only those of us who are making similar decisions, but we have to extend ourselves to those leaders that are weighing out other kinds of considerations. Not only tolerate and appreciate, not only tolerate the decisions they're having to make and the trade-offs they're weighing, but respect those as valid and understand that it's their job to come from that perspective, but it's also our job to fully represent the needs of the people we serve. This pandemic is a breeding ground for rage and despair. And there is nothing you're going to do that is more important than creating, maintaining all the connections that are necessary so that no one that you serve feels as though they've been forgotten. It's a sad fact that every disaster in the aftermath shows a significant uptick of double percentage points of all of the things that we wish we could avoid. And those are an uptick in domestic violence, an uptick in child abuse, an uptick in substance abuse, and because all of those actually breed in isolation. They grow in isolation. And so Zoom is powerful, a phone call is powerful, a letter is powerful. Every form of daily connection matters, and to the extent you're promoting any of those, resourcing those, you are on the team that is fighting the secondary wave of this disaster, the virus of despair and violence and harm, and that we really need to stand we need to stand in the breach for that one. So I'm getting close to the end of my comments here. One challenge, we have had to forbid a lot of things, right? We've had to say, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it's been a steady withdrawing of things we're not allowed to do anymore. Within your home, within your community, allow everything that is not destructive, that is not a violation. I saw a delightful video today, and it was a family saying, really, are we really going to make these kids go to school every day? Parents are valiantly trying. There are a lot of parents also realizing that we need to take the lid off and actually devote a part of it every day to just singing, dancing, celebration. These things are absolutely necessary. They're necessary. This is a shelter. This is one of the shelters in Germany. It was a very institutional, very cold, monochromatic facility, and then there was a great desire to paint something that would liven it up and make it feel like home. Right now, allow everything that is not in violation of the orders, allow everything that is not destructive, anything to do with music, dance, celebration. We've all been encouraged by the videos we've seen, the creative work that people have done. Okay, so what does this mean? At every milestone, gratitude and grief in equal measure. Here's the American narrative that we really like is once upon a time, things were tragic, awful, and terrible. And then along came heroic, insert heroic institution, individual, etc., happily ever after. But this is not the human story. In fact, every change is also, every change, even those we seek and embrace, is also a loss. We move to a larger home, we cry for the home we left behind, the memories there. Our children go off to college, we're excited, we know it's an important milestone, we cry because we miss the little people they once were. And as we move out of this, there will be gratitude. Yes, we're once again out and about, but there will also be grief. And it will be both because of the losses that have accompanied this economic disaster, but it'll also be the grief of the lost moments that we've had with one another, the ways in which we've been together that are unique and different because of this disaster. So just allow them to live side by side in your heart. Don't think that you have to pick one. They live together. All right. In New Orleans, we really know how to hold a funeral. So when, it was a woman in lower ninth that really brought this lesson home to me. And that's when you have a second line parade in New Orleans, which you may not do right now, even, my relatives are not particularly law abiding at times, and they're having to get the message. Even second lines, a sacred second line parade, not allowed. But we march in solemn, in a very solemn way to the cemetery, and we march in a very joyous way away from it. We cannot return to the people, the species, the countries, the societies we were before this. It does have an end, but at the end of it, we will be changed. And there will be things that you will quite rightly say a permanent goodbye to, programs that didn't make it through, businesses that didn't survive. And it's important to hold a funeral. And that acknowledgement of those losses is a powerful thing to do. All right. So Bill and I wrote a thing together about oaths. There are certain professions, and in those professions, we ask them to take an oath. Really, we make them commit to something larger than themselves, raise their right hand, or place it over their heart, or on a Bible, or on a holy book, and we ask them, promise us that you will commit to this thing larger than you. You're writing a blank check with your heart and soul to something that is not about you. We don't issue oaths and tell people, oh, you must pledge to care for yourself. We assume quite rightly, most of us have some form of preservation instinct. But we do call people to take oaths when we want them to make the commitment and the ultimate, if necessary, sacrifice to be about something bigger than them. So my question for you today is, what are the commitments? What are the oaths that you've made, perhaps only in your heart, and it maybe wasn't required? It could be your commitment to social justice. It could be your commitment to the mission of the organization, to your community, to your people. Whatever it is, I think it's a good time, if you haven't already, to be very clear about what matters most to you and what you're going to commit to above and beyond your own comfort, your own safety, and that of your family. Because we may come to those kinds of choices, and it's better to have clarity going in about what we're willing to sacrifice if it becomes necessary. So with that, I'll say, you know, I believe this might be a Meg Wheatley original, or I don't know. We spent so much time together. I'm not sure sometimes who said what. I think this is hers. The human spirit is not extinguishable, not by fire, not by floods, not by a virus. We have this incredible capacity to act with grace, and kindness, and generosity, and this is a moment in which all of those matter a great deal. So glad that you allowed me to be with you today. Thank you.
Angela, that was your usual wise and profound self. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. Bill's doing my PR forever.
I'll continue to do it.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do at this point is open it up for questions and start. First of all, ask Mariella to, in a few minutes, kind of alert me to questions that are in the chat box. I would like to start with our own 21 class from Rhode Island. And actually, Kisa, I see you actually online, and Kisa was the one who actually took the initiative to submit a few questions beforehand. So rather than restate the questions, I'm going to ask you, Kisa, and give you the first opportunity to ask whatever question you might want, whether it's from what you've submitted or something that occurs to you right now.
Could you get back to me in 1 minute so I could just think about that for a second?
I'm sorry, I can't put you on the spot. Sure. So let's open it up to any of the IMP Rhode Island people.
So Shelby asked in the chat, what does it look like to hold a funeral when this is all over? Or what are some experiences of collective mourning that you've had to help people grieve and move forward?
Well, it was Cynthia in Lower Ninth who invited, in about a year, I asked her, how is it that you were able to go on? Because Lower Ninth was one of the most devastated places in New Orleans, place where people had deep roots. So what was the moment, I said, when you decided to commit to rebuild? And she said that it was on Memorial Day, about a year after Katrina, and they decided to go to the place in the levee where it had broken and where many people were washed away. And they would bring whatever they had to that place. If they had found anything, if anything remained that belonged to the individual, a photo or any other, they would bring it. They brought it there and they placed it at the levee, at the break in the levee. And then the Treme brass band, because you know it's New Orleans, yay, came and played, and it became a community acknowledgement, because there were people lost and no one ever saw them again, and there was no body and there was no burial. And so the community said goodbye, and she said, we could not have begun our rebuilding had we not acknowledged. We would have felt so guilty to be moving on without acknowledging these people and saying what they meant to us. And I've seen it done in the, believe it or not, in some of the coldest, what you might imagine, the coldest corporations who had to shut down a division or a program. So we ask people, come, bring your whole self to work, commit to this, pour your heart into it. And then we go, oh, well, we're cutting the budget for that. You can go home now. So a funeral inside of an organization to say goodbye to something we all worked on, that we all committed to and we all cared about, it looks like when we recall those moments when it was great, what we did together, what it meant, what were the results, and we thank everybody involved and we say goodbye to it. So you can create these, and some of them are powerful, and some of them are gut-wrenching, that they're all healing. They allow us to move on, because every single time we push people to move to the next thing without acknowledging loss, they move forward with a little less heart and a little less soul, because they say to themselves, I gave you everything I had last time, and it was just erased. And so this is what we do, so that people put their hearts and souls into things again going forward. So,
Kisa, do you want to chime in, or do you want to take another question? We'll take another question.
I'm sorry, did you say Kisa?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I had a lot of actual questions, Angela. Thank you so much. I guess one of them, I had an opportunity to read a little bit from your blog. And I was wondering if you could, the essay you had written about, or the reflections about getting old, and your women friends talking about life. I guess I was interested in your own, any kind of shifts you've seen in your own life related to how you focus your energy and attention.
well, oh, thank you. So that was a difficult piece to write. It was sort of I kind of needed it for myself, because as the Me Too, as that sort of spread and these voices were coming and speaking about these stories, it was very, very painful for me, because, these are largely the stories that I didn't talk about. I maybe told a friend or two friends, but my generation, we didn't feel we had any choices. So it's a powerful thing when the people coming after you, this is what you long for when you work for change. You long for it. You want to see that person coming after you widen the avenue of possibility. We want them to really stand on the work we've done. We hope that for them, there'll be more freedom to show up fully as themselves with a measure of safety that we didn't have. But it was a little bit of there were people, being very accusatory. If you kept quiet, you're part of the problem. And I knew better, because we all picked those moments when we knew that our silence was a price. It cost something, but we were holding out for the bigger win. And we think, and actually, what is it like for me now? You're the bigger win. So every young woman I see now that thinks this is the minimum that she should have to experience, instead of where I lived, that's my win. So yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for reading it.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to read them. I was interested in the one about your son and estuaries, and I could go on and on with questions, but I'll take a step back for others.
Yeah. So I encourage everyone to read the one on feral hogs. It's really important bit of wisdom there, and you need it. I don't generally talk about feral hogs in my presentations, but I encourage you to read up on them. We have a few of them loose in the world, crapping all over everything. You can't be confusing them with pet pigs, right? They're dangerous. All right. What else?
So
Mariela.
So I haven't seen any other questions from Rhode Island students. If you feel free to just chat me directly or put them right in the chat. But we did have a question during the presentation from Laura, who was asking if you had any lessons learned about how support pours in during the immediate wake of a disaster and then starts to fizzle out, and then how can we manage that knowing that long-term relief is just as important?
Yeah. So we're experiencing now this is a long-term, it's all long-term. The disaster, when the camera pans across the scene and says, oh, they've lost everything. Honestly, as a nonprofit leader, I used to say the most inefficient and disruptive form of philanthropy in the world is disaster philanthropy. It's the impulse giving that occurs at the moment when we're really feeling for people. And I spent all of Harvey saying to people who asked me, what could I do? I'm like, put this date on your calendar a year from now. Mark this date on your calendar a year from now, because everyone will have moved on and we won't be done. So you're going to live with that. And if we can have deeper conversations, the work you're doing together, all of that helps. We are stuck with the storytelling that's done by the click obsessed forms of media we have. That's who's telling our story. So you have to be very persistent and really loud if you're going to get a story out there that is the true nature of a disaster and how it really unfolds. It's going to take enormous stubbornness and a relentless repetition of the message. This is a 2-year event. This is a 3-year event. Come back to us in a year. We'll need you then. Collect all the information now, and then a year from now say, remember when you cared? This is the time, because we really, really need you. People wanted to. So here we are operating shelters, and people are like, I have some furniture. I'm like, that would be great if they had a house, So it's as a leader, you're trying to manage all the impulses in the arena and weave that narrative. Tell the story again and again in a way that helps people understand where we are in that unfolding set of events, right?
All right, so another question. For those moving forward, there has to be an acknowledgement of loss of staff being the new normal, and many organizations have laid off staff. So can you speak to leaders to this? That's a question from David.
So one of the things I battled in that, as we grew as an organization, we became very large. We had a lot of attorneys that wanted to advise us as the proper way to dismiss people. And in Texas, it's an at-will state. I couldn't fire anybody for an illegal reason, but I could simply say, you're no longer needed. And there was always the legal advice that that's what we should do. And when you have to shut down a program, to do it that way, I've been dealing this past week with landlords who have tenants that were fired by email. I mean, that's crushing. It's a soul-crushing thing to do. And as nonprofit leaders, you have to ignore most of the legal advice you get. And you have, if you're going to do this well, and still you can stay on the side of not exposing your organization to conflicts that you can't support or fund. But you can say to people, we appreciate so much what you've meant, and here's what you've meant to the organization. It's not cost you nothing to let that person, to acknowledge the contributions they made, to put that in writing as you have to, if you have to let them go, and to acknowledge what they've meant to the organization and to the people you serve. These are inevitable. If you don't have the guts for that, you can't lead, you can't run an organization. But it doesn't have to be a heartless, soulless thing. And the companies, it's all you have to do right now is just watch the headlines to see which companies are showing up as more than a corporate bottom line, as really good stewards of people and resources. I'm so sorry that you're facing this. I know it's difficult. Many of us fight for programs, and then when we have to end them, it takes a little piece of our heart too. Restarting them is not so easy. So I'm sorry. Tough part of leading.
We also had a couple questions come in regarding appreciative inquiry and how you've woven that approach into your disaster response and leadership framework. So do you have some practical examples of how you've used appreciative inquiry in your response?
Well, I think in the most practical way, so I'll give you a couple of quick examples. As I was advising housing folks this past week, April 1st is coming, tomorrow, yes. People will need to pay their rent, and over 750,000 people in this region most likely will have trouble paying their rent because they're all the people that worked in all the venues and hotels and everything it's just gone. So, when we talk to people, these were property managers trying to figure out how do we work with people when they've got a problem with their rent. And, it's either a rush, people want to say either a rush to judgment, like, well, they have to pay their rent, or maybe we should just give them this and then extend their lease. And I thought, why don't we ask them? Why don't we say, and if you live in this region, you've already been through upheaval several times. Why don't we ask the families, what would work for you? When you faced uncertainty in the past around your employment and your home, what did you do? What would work best for you now? How can we help you do that? So, and it was the same thing after Katrina, as we were welcoming people to Houston, it was very hard to sit across from someone, headline, they've lost everything. They have to tell their story, but at the end of that story, the first question is, tell me what you saved. Tell me what are the strengths and skills and resources that you have? What are the relationships? The question is seeking from someone insight into what they feel they have to contribute, particularly when they've just gone through this kind of a devastating abandonment. It's pretty transformational. I saw the change in the way people sat in their chairs because they realized we actually believed that they had something to offer, and we were curious about what it was. So I could give you hundreds of examples because we've been on that appreciative inquiry path for a really long time. It's incredibly important in a disaster because you're looking for those strengths and skills, resources and assets, because that's what you've got to work with, for better, for worse, right? Okay.
All right, so we also have a question asking from Amy. Some of our organizations have already or will find ourselves soon in situations where we're asking staff to put their lives on their line, for example, caring for residents in a group home where there's coronavirus exposure. What are some things you recommend we keep in mind, think about, and do as we move through these challenges?
Well, if you look at the little 13 things I sent out, I think anything short of absolute blunt honesty and a clear conversation about what's being asked of them is insufficient on the part of leaders. Anna Kofi, again, I talk about her because she is a public health attorney and leads the women's home here, and has experience with epidemics. So her background helped her see this coming, and she prepared her staff, many of whom thought she was exaggerating it. This past week, they've actually had a staff fall ill and go to the hospital. And she's had to have a conversation in which she has asked for staff that are willing to step in to be at this residence hall where that person worked, and people have come forward to volunteer. So the same thing's going in New York. I think Governor Cuomo announced 37,000, some enormous number of volunteers, retirees, people that weren't working, were asked to come forward if they were a health professional, and they did. So it is common for people to risk their well-being on others' behalf. So you'll be inviting people to do that. with a very frank and honest, clear conversation about what they're risking. One of the other nonprofit leaders I talked to recently, I had hoped to finish writing up all these stories and get them to you because I thought you would recognize in these yourselves and all of these people. There's a Katie, her name is Katie White, and she runs Mid-Maine Homeless Services. And so she was faced with the dilemma that the only way to maintain the social distancing and prepare the shelter with an isolation area was to cut in half the number of people that were residing in the shelter. So what would you do? I mean, what would you do? Make half the people in the shelter homeless in order to preserve the half, the safety and health of the other half? No, obviously. I mean, she wasn't satisfied with that as an answer and worked beyond it. But these are the kinds of decisions as nonprofit leaders we're facing, and they're in stark relief right now. I mean, we make subtle decisions, we make more subtle decisions, more removed decisions every day that impact people by resourcing some and not others. But right now, it's part of that elimination that happens in a disaster. So
another question that asks, in the aftermath of disaster, have you seen institutions transform? How have you seen institutions transform for the better? Health coverage, criminal justice reform, and if so, what conditions and actions made that possible?
So let me have you think about that. I've seen people transform, and I think that transformation of institutions, I'm a little struggling with the word, because over the last few years, I've come to use evolution rather than transformation, because I think we like transformation because, again, especially in the US, we love a good transformation story. Once upon a time, terrible, awful, tragic, suddenly, fortunately, happily ever after. That, whether we acknowledge it or not, when we say transformation, we're really thinking about that sort of story. I prefer evolution, and evolution actually means that an organization adapts and adjusts. It becomes more competent at dealing with the arena and the environment in which it finds itself. It becomes more it grows in efficacy. It grows in its ability to be constructively active. So these are terms that I embrace more because I've seen a lot of organizations evolve, and I've seen systems fail. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and I'll sum it up this way: what gets led gets done. I think we think leadership is optional, but I've never seen any sort of successful evolution that wasn't led. And I've never seen a recovery that wasn't well led. Someone has to care enough to put it all on the line. You can't afford the safe careerists, folks protecting their resume, like, I'm not gonna commit to this because, man, I could fall on my face. My dear brother, he's a rabid capitalist, and he has one measure of life success, and it's the bottom line. A man with a focus, and he's really good at it. So he calls me as I'm trying to pull the shelter together, and he says, "This is the worst decision you've ever made. You've done so well, and people think highly of you. This is gonna be a big screw up, and you're gonna own it. This is the worst mistake you've ever made. What in the world made you agree to do this?" Because I was on my way out the door. I was collecting the certificates they give you after you're, been at something about 30 years. And it wasn't the one I wanted when I was 40, when I'm like, just give me a little bit of encouragement. I'm just telling y'all, they give it all to you at the end. But so, I was on my way out the door collecting my little certificates, and my brother was really concerned I was about to screw the whole thing up. but that's leadership. You actually say, this could actually be a mess. This could turn out badly, but we've got to do it. We've got to give it everything we have. And I'm really partial to people that'll put something on the line and step up.
So can you speak also to the role of vulnerability in leadership in times of crisis, and how you can both lead with integrity and hope while balancing your own fears and anxieties?
So, a lot's been made over vulnerability, and if that's something important to you, by all means, focus on it. But when I'm in the arena, in the middle of a real catastrophe, my anything is not important. So, and I want to say this in the gentlest way possible, because of course we all know we have to care for ourselves, and we've learned all this, but I fear sometimes that need to attend to our own well-being has morphed into something so all-consuming. So I say to people, how much do you have to have before you stop thinking about yourself and you start thinking about everyone else? So my fear in the arena is insignificant, because I'm not the person that's standing at the door of that shelter with everything I have in a bag. I'm not that person at that moment. Yeah, I might, what am I gonna fear? A professional embarrassment. What is that? So, instead I'm not focused on me. And so, and vulnerability, for me, I have a very stringent definition of courage, and I don't even meet it most of the time when I'm trying really hard. Courage for me is the woman who walked across the border from Syria to Jordan to get out to save her last 2 remaining children from the war. That's courage. It's a fierce determination, come hell or high water, to preserve what's most precious to you. So I have really tough definitions. I've been told I was, some people I work with still like me, so I guess I wasn't full-time awful. But, I've been told I was very demanding and difficult, because I would have staff that say to me, I'm scared to go on stage and do this. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care that you're scared. The people that we're talking about here are way more scared than you. And so it's really what service does for us. It makes us better, because instead of being wrapped around the axle of our own anxieties and fears, and God, I've got a ton of them, I don't want to spend any time there. I want to spend time stepping up for the larger thing that's really for the whole, for the thing that allows us all to be together. So I'm, sorry. It's like, I'm glad I don't have to work for her. But, there was this wonderful person who's a tremendous leader. And I remember all the way back to the days when she told me, I don't do public speaking. I just can't. People have told me the same thing about budgets they can't do, and they can't do this and they can't do that. I'm like, well, too bad, because you're it. We're here. It's you. It's now. Get your butt on the stage. And so, just being honest.
Absolutely.
Because I treat myself the same way. It's like,
I told them you were tough, Angela.
Yeah, get the program here.
Yes, so we also had a question from Pat, who said, so many leaders are feeling paralyzed, trying to work through contingencies, without feeling clarity around their locus of control. You mentioned more or less that we need to do what you can with what we have right now. And the challenge can often be defining what control I or we do have. So what practical examples can you share about how you have helped your teams own what they control in managing those crises?
Yeah, such a good question. You have to take a bit of an inventory. That's that 360 scan I'm talking about. It's like at the very base of that pyramid is of control is the things that in fact you do control. They're written down, they're in law, they're in a contract, they're in your title, they're in your responsibilities. These are formal assignments of power and responsibility over people and resources. So when you do a quick inventory of that, if you're an executive director, you have a measure of formal power. You're allocating resources and you're determining the use of staff time. And in many cases, you're also shaping what your boards and volunteers are paying attention to. Those are immediate, those are written down, that's clear. Beyond that, you also have the power and control that comes through trusting relationships, the connections you have. We, you know, when we got the shelter set up, woke up the next, about 2 a.m., you know, we were feeling a little triumphant, which always precedes the most, you know, the opportunity for humility. They go side by side. And we're like, holy shit, we don't have any food. And the people that had said they would bring food couldn't get in. It's like, oh, the triumph just turned to the old woman who lived in the shoe that had so many children and didn't know what to do and nothing to feed them. So, you know, quickly I began thinking, who can I call? Who do I know that is, you know, in the grocery business? Who do I know that's in food supply? And we began working those phones and those social media contacts until we unearthed some resources. So it's the power, and people came because they knew I wouldn't call them out for some, you know, frivolous reason, and I wasn't going to demand something of them that wasn't within their power to do. So you move out from what you absolutely control to where you can have influence, where you can shape a story and a view to get others to act at the farthest, at the most outward part of that circle. So because it's so easy in the nonprofit sector, because we're often treated like the handmaids of the world. It's like the private sector does what it does and shit falls apart, and the public sector does what it does and then shit falls apart. And they're like, okay, third sector, you step up. We got some messes here. You know, all other stuff working fine. We don't know what's wrong here. You do it. And so it's easy for the nonprofit sector to feel like, you know, like we don't have power because everyone can tell us no. But we do get to decide how we use our time, energy, and the resources within our command. We use our voice. We use our influence. We use our friends, everybody that we come into contact with to shape the story about how to move through this. And if you focus on that, you get stuff done. The world gives way to relentless persistence. It really, even in Texas.
So we had another question about how you lead in times of crisis if you're not a leader, with quotation marks, with decision-making power, and especially if the leaders perhaps aren't responding to vulnerable communities as you think they could with the resources that they have.
Yeah, so I had one of these conversations this past week. Meg Wheatley's famous for saying, I think leadership has nothing to do with position. And the leaders that emerge in disasters, you know, I was speaking about Katie White after she made these decisions and got these folks sorted and found hotel rooms for the people that couldn't be at the shelter anymore. And then she asked for volunteers for her staff to work. She said, I now know who my ride or die people are. After disasters, you just see people stand up, you step up. And those are leaders, that people willing to step forward and help. I believe is how Meg puts it. But when you're working, so I had a conversation this week with a dear colleague who's super unhappy with the leadership, as she puts it, the leadership. And we tend to confuse hierarchy and leadership. You know, the possessing the title of CEO, it does not make you a leader. It gives you control. It gives you power over resources and people. It doesn't make you a leader. A leader is someone who commits to something larger than themselves and their own self-interest and their own comfort and their own, etc. That's what makes you a leader. So if you're looking around and saying, well, I don't think these people are leading well, what are you doing? And this is a tough conversation I had this past week. I'm like, why are you focused up there? I mean, you don't control them. You can't do anything about them. Yet you run a program. You have a budget, you have 200 staff, and you're actually focused on everybody else. I mean, what are your staff doing? What do they need from you? What, even more importantly, get your attention back on the people you're serving, because that will immediately removes any time you might have to judge anybody else's behavior. You know, if you still have time to watch our current president's press conferences, then, I mean, you're overlooking something that you should be doing, because you can't do anything about that. But within your purview, within your arena of influence, there are people hurting toward whom you have some responsibility. And what do they need? So, you know, in my talk with my friend, and she's dear, I mean, she's fantastic. We all get lost, and we need someone to talk to in the middle of the storm. But she went back to, oh, this is what I need to do for my seniors. And then suddenly she's feeling powerful again, because that's something she can change. That's something she can do something about. And that's where you, in a disaster, you don't have any time. You know, you're not writing a book, unless you are. And if you are, great. But if you're writing a book on judging leadership in disaster and chronicling leadership failures, by all means, spend all your time on that. But otherwise, you have work to do. You don't have time for that.
Thank you. So we also have a question from Caitlin that asks, what would you recommend to organizations that are not in sectors in the heart of the crisis right now? So not healthcare, housing, but or maybe peripheral like youth development, and want to help. They don't want to supersede the primary needs, but don't want to just hide away until things are different. And also that tension between selling their work in the midst of a crisis, but can't survive without funding, and how we can balance a lot of that.
Yeah, so it's when to step forward and step back. You know, there was some elected or aspiring to be elected officials sent me a fundraising thing yesterday. I thought, are you out of your mind? I mean, really, you actually think we're thinking about you right now? We're not. So I understand the tension. I think, first of all, you know, when I have had to make that call, I think it's your connections to one another. If I'm serving youth and youth are not at the center of the where the greatest pain is being felt right now, then I'm checking in with the leaders of the organizations that are, to see how I can align with what they're doing, because we should all pivot. We should all pivot, not completely, not a complete abandonment of what you're doing and kind of rushing into the scene, but everybody needs to step up a little. And you might just have to time your actions and your seeking of support for later, because it's going to hit everybody. No one is going to get out of this without being impacted. So the time will come for the appeal that you need to make. And those times come, it's very painful. These are the tough choices, because funders will make them. One of my friends is a program officer, a very high-ranking program officer at a very large foundation. And, you know, the foundation's entire grant-making capability has been severely harmed by the drop in the stock market, because the earnings they had to distribute in grants are lower. And then it's Texas, so, you know, oil fell, and you know, that affects everybody here. When people say we don't like oil money, all money is oil money at some point, just saying. So all of that's fallen. So what she has to distribute is less right when it's most needed. This is always the case. There is never a time when a disaster comes, by its very definition and nature, it's an event that exceeds our capacity to respond. So difficult choices will have to be made, and some of them may involve stepping back because your organization isn't the priority and can't be heard right now.
Thank you. There's also a question about how you keep on keeping on and your own ability to sustain, and then also how you practice loving detachment in times like this.
Well, part of how I keep on, you know, Bill's friends like Bill, and they're not that many, he's special, really help. I mean, I consider it part of I'm not joking here, it's like part of my obligation in life to bring back stories when I come to Providence from Texas and make Bill laugh. And fortunately, there's always some really idiotic stuff going on in Texas that, you know, is entertaining, tragic, but entertaining. So making Bill laugh is a big part of how I keep going. And Brown, and I think the Brown University has been enormously gracious toward me. I'm not a scholar. I could never be a scholar. I know sooner to learn something and I feel like popping right up out of my chair and going to try it out. But they have embraced my way of learning and the knowledge I've acquired through the work I've done. And I think then it respected me as a practitioner, which has given me the opportunity to put the work I've done in a context so even I can better understand my own experience. Those things have been really nurturing for me and have helped me a lot at this stage of my life. And then honestly, it's every chance I get to meet with folks like all of you. I mean, you know, you're my tribe. So, I mean, we show up for the same reasons every day to try to make things work better for everyone. And we have good days and we have bad days, but largely it's being united in that commitment with others has always kept me going. You know, things like going dancing works too. Can't do that right now, but you can dance in your own living room.
So sort of related, there was another question about how social distancing efforts have led to even more social isolation, and that's had a real consequence on mental health. And there's so many without access to internet, Zoom, computers, the way that we're even interacting right now. So do you have any words of wisdom or thoughts about how we can be addressing the incoming social recession as well?
Well, you know, I suspect you all probably know as much or more about that particular question as I do. I think that the disasters they're not fair. They don't spare those that are already operating at a disadvantage. But I was very inspired by a story from another nonprofit, and it was from an IT guy. You know, these are our invisible enablers and hard workers right now. All the IT guys and gals in every department and every institution that had to figure out how to answer a lot of, in my case, ridiculous questions and get devices into the hands of people and make those devices work. And, you know, this guy told me about all the hours he spent, you know, just 3 straight days without going home, reconfiguring computers and pulling computers out of computer labs and getting them into the hands of children in our charter school. So, you know, I think we can either observe this divide or we can do everything possible in this moment to correct it for every single person we can and get a device in their hands so that they can be connected. It's really, most families, even the poorest families that we've been serving, have some kind of device that allows them to connect with others, with the exception, and I don't mean every family, but with the exception of seniors. And seniors are really suffering for that right now. I talk about them like I'm not one. My son pointed out to me, Mom, do you realize you have the last remaining landline in the city of Houston? I don't think that's true. But you know, I can't give it up because just in the event one day this doesn't work, I have a landline. But yeah, so we really have to think about the people who can't make their way around the technology. But a lot of us are learning really, really, really fast. And I hope that offers something promising. I think telemedicine, it feels soulless to me and it doesn't seem like it can be nurturing. but a number of people in the past week have used it and found it enormously helpful and extremely reassuring, and that includes seniors. So it may mean more access in the future if we can figure out how to correct the lack of, how to fix the device issue. You guys are tough. You're tough. The questions are tough and deep and important, and I'm really grateful for the chance to be with you.
Yes, and we wanted to thank you absolutely for being here as well. I believe that's all the questions. However, there's several gratitudes in the chat, and just as people are leaving, if they could just write something that you're taking away, just either it's a moment of gratitude or one of the major thoughts or themes. Very early in, there was a woman, Meg, who mentioned that she was a resident of New Orleans, and she just thanked you for taking the time to really dig into that and talk about that so respectfully. She really enjoyed it. And then just some of the other takeaways, such as no one's coming, we can't wait. And then also every milestone, there will be gratitude and grief in equal measure. So if people can just continue writing those in the chat, I will hand it over to Marisabel.
I just saw a couple of the about play before there's an audience. Yeah, that's a good, that's good to take away. And what gets led gets done. Yeah. Well, you've got it. You guys, you're in their arena. It's your moment. This is your disaster. You have to own it. You can, you're up for it.
Thank
Angela,
you so much.
Thanks, Bill.
You've inspired us enormously. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right.
I do want to thank those that have supported this whole afternoon, starting with the IEP team, Marisabel, Mariela, you've taught me today how useful chat can be, but also having a smart person monitoring chat and asking the questions. I thought that went really nice. So congratulations, Nate and Yolanda. And I hope I haven't, those are the team.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thank you to Brandy, because she's been holding my hand for the last couple of weeks. And she's heard a little bit of my whining. And she's very kind, and but she's also walked me through some, getting some things published, getting contracts, getting paid. It's important. So thanks, Brandy, for being here today.
Yeah, in fact, I was just going to add Brandy.
Okay.
Thank you, Brandy, a lot. I can tell you're just the type of person that Angela needs. And she's been looking for months. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
She knows what date it is. It's so amazing. You know?
So with Marisabel, did you want to make a final comment?
Yeah, I would just like to thank both of you. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Angela, for your generosity, for extending this to the broader community. Thank you to all of the attendees who were so engaged, and for your questions, for the takeaways. Angela, I hope you get a chance to read some of it. People are taking a lot with them. So we thank you for the inspiration, for challenging us, for making us think, and to make us see things as they are. So thank you so much. And to all of the attendees, we will be sharing a recording again. Thanks to the generosity of Angela, she has let us record this session, and we will be sharing that with you in the next few days. Have a lovely rest of your day. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything else, but now you can go out. It's beautiful and sunny, and go maybe for a little walk.
Yes, yes.
All except the Rhode Island participants.
That's right.
We'll take a break and go into their practice seminar.
Great.
Thank you so much. It was really, really nice. Bye-bye.
Beautiful.
Bye.
Thank you, Angela. Bye-bye.
Take care.